So this is our first demonstration. We're going to do some dart manipulation using the pivot method. We'll be transferring our dart from the waist dart into the shoulder dart. So we're pivoting the waist to the shoulder. We'll be using the point paper. The point paper is this white paper. It has notices on the other side. You want to use the clear white side. We'll be doing two versions for all of our exercises, demonstrations in class. I'll be using the full scale bodice. For your homework and all your notebook exercises, you'll be using the half scale bodice until we do the full sample. So I'm going to show you both versions, the difference between the full scale and the half scale. The half scale basically is when we talk about you're taking everything in half. So if we talk about an inch hem on the full bodice, it's a ½ hem on the half scale. If it's a 1/4 inch at the neckline, it's an 1/8 of an inch on the half scale. If it's a ½ inch seam allowance on the full scale, it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the half scale. So the first thing you need to do in all of your exercises is you need to establish the grain line. I'm going to use my L square, but you can also use your triangle tool. You can also use these as a guide for yourself. If you don't have either of those, that you can see through the paper using your graph ruler. I like using the metal L square because it's more stable. And I'm going to, step 1 is establish my grain line. This will be, we're working with the center front, so this is going to be my center front grain line. Then I need to hook up my sloper to that grain line. I like to make sure that it's exactly on the line, not out or inside of the line. And I like to use weights in order to stabilize my sloper so it doesn't shift. Step number 2 that we need to do is establish where we want the style line to go. Where is our new dart? So number 1, our grain. Number 2, identify where the new dart is going to go. In this exercise, we're shifting the waist dart into the shoulder line. So I want to pick a mark on my shoulder line, my midpoint mark, and mark my sloper. I'm marking my on my graph paper there. Step 3 is we always are going to draw from new to old. When I'm saying old, I'm talking about the first dart leg that's closest to the center front. So I'm going to trace from this mark on the shoulder where my new dart is going to go. Shoulder, neckline, I already have my center front. And then I'm drawing from my first dart leg to the center front. Then I'm going to put my pencil into the dart apex or the bust point. I pick up my weights and I'm now going to pivot, which means rotate, this second dart leg to where the first dart leg position is, which is effectively closing the dart. So if you see here, this notch now aligns to the mark I made. And now I need to finish tracing my draft. I'm going to finish tracing my draft. I'm going from new, so where I made my mark on the shoulder, back to old. Shoulder, armhole, armhole notch, side seam, and waist. Make sure everything is there. I can clearly see my bust point. One of the ways to ensure that you'll clearly see your bust point is to punch a hole through it. So I have my trace. You'll notice this large gap here where the shoulder was, and the waist is now closed. So one of the first things I need to do is blend this area. You can see there's some uneven area here. I'm going to use my curve tool, my French curve in this situation, and I want to blend my waist back so it's nice and even. This area here, so I'm going to smooth that out. And now with my eraser tool, the red line because of my new line. I simply clean that up. So one of the things about pattern making is always precision and cleanness. Next, I need to now draw in where this new dart is. I need to first identify where the dart center. So the dart center is exactly in between these two new dart legs. Using my graph ruler, I'm going to find the center of this. I pick a mark on my dart, so I want to make sure they're equal. There we have it. And now that will be the center of my dart. I'm going to draw a line from that new dart center to the apex. Here, I'm going to come back here and just marking these up a little so we can see them more clearly. You've got a pencil. I just want to highlight these so you can clearly see what some of these lines are. And the shoulder. My shoulder. So, rule number one about darts, we never want the sew line to come all the way to the true apex. That would be a very pointy fit, very tight fit. Real garments require ease in order for movement, so we need to back off from this dart. So you're going to back off from the dart 5/8 of an inch. So that's 5/8 of an inch. I'm backing off from the true apex. This is my apex mark, my true bust point. And this will be my new dart center. 5/8 of an inch away from that apex. Now I can draw in my dart legs. The dart legs will go to this new apex line. I'm going to hook up my dart legs to that dart center. Then the next thing that we need to do is to true the dart. We need to find where the dart excess is going so that we can true this shoulder seam. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold my dart on its new apex. Simply crease that there. And then we want to fold the dart excess away from the body. So we always want the dart excess away from the center front, following the law of gravity, falling down toward the bottom head. So that means I'm going to fold on the lower dart leg, the dart leg that's away from the body, from the center of the body. I want to fold right on that dart leg. Just a crease. This is where pattern making is like origami. Now I'm going to go back to that apex. And I'm going to fold this dart leg on top of that dart leg to see I need to true my shoulder line. So I take my graph ruler and I align my shoulder seam point to point, and I'm going to now correct the difference between the two. Notice there where the blue line and the red line is, is a variation of difference. We're going to follow what's on the red line. And in order to see this white paper here, this dart excess, this dart intake, I know which way our seam allowance is going to go. I'm going to use my tracing wheel over top of that. Now I can see using my tracing wheel where this dart intake is. I'm going to put a dash line here for myself. Now that you have your draft, we need to add identifying information to help us turn this into a real pattern. The first thing is the dart. That's a lot of excess in there. It would be a lot of bulk in a real garment. So we want to reduce the amount of excess in here by actually converting this to simple seam allowance. Those of you who've sewn a pattern before, you may have seen there is often a punch line in the dart that tells the sewer where to stop. You don't want to sew all the way to the actual true apex. So the first thing is that punch line, that punch mark for the dart is always going to be 1/2 inch away from the new dart apex that you've drawn. And you'll draw a circle around that. This is your punch mark for your dart. It's 1/2 inch away from your new dart apex. Then I'm going to add seam allowance. The seam allowance for my garment is as follows. 1/4 inch on the neckline. 1/2 inch on the side seam. 1/2 inch on my armhole. 1/2 inch on my shoulder and on my dart legs. The waist, we're going to treat this garment as if it were a top, so it would have a 1-inch hem. The center front. If this is a shirt and we needed to add buttons to it, we would have to create an extension. For the purposes of this garment, we want this to be a full front. So we need to mark what our grain line is. This will be cut on the fold. So I need to add that information to my garment. My fold line here would be center, front, cut on fold. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my seam allowances. For the shoulder, I'm using my graph ruler. I have a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch. For my side seam, I have a 1/2 inch. Notice I'm aligning the center of the line. For my hem, it's 1 inch. Now, a couple of things about corners on a pattern. We also want to remember that this ultimately will be a sewn garment. Every corner you want needs to be straightened in order to make the sewing process smoother. So you always want the corners, when you come to a section, to be squared and perpendicular to one another. So as we come to corners, we want to make sure that these are all squared off. We call that truing the pattern. So that means here at the center front, we want to have this at least about 1/2 inch straight before we start following the curve of the bottom hem. And I'm just going to put a dot line here so I can connect the dots afterwards. Same thing here when we come to the side seam. We want this to be straight because we want it to be a smooth sewn seam. And then once I have my dash line here, I can use that as a guide to connect the dots. Using my French curve on the bottom hem, nice and smooth. And what you'll ultimately come back then afterwards is clean it up. Make sure there's no stray dashes in there. Then we'll come back and do that same thing with the armhole and the neckline. The top of the armhole here should be straight for that first 1/2 inch. And then you're going to connect the dots following this curve. And for that, where it joins with the side seam, you want that first 1/2 inch to be straight and smooth. Now I'll come back with my French curve here to connect the dots. come back with my eraser tool to clean up all that jagged line. The goal is a nice smooth line. This is why I want you to use pencil for your drawings. Same thing here with the neckline. It's 1/4 of an inch. Connecting the dots so that I have a nice smooth neckline. At the center front, 1/2 inch is perpendicular or straight. French curve to connect the dots. Pencil to clean it up, eraser. Any extra lines, you want to make sure there's cleaned up. The seam allowance. Seam allowance here. So you don't want the lines to crisscross when you come to this dart center. This is where we're going to have to come back and clean it up. Once you've drawn it, we want to erase this center line. Okay. 1 inch hem, 1/2 inch side seam, seam allowance, 1/2 inch on the armhole. Notice that as I'm coming to all the corners, I'm double checking everything so it's true and clean. A good pattern maker always double checks and trues and cleans. Last step, notches. Notches are what tell us and our team where they need to cut. So the rule of notches is you want to only go in halfway through the seam allowance, not all the way through. Starting from the bottom hem, and we're going to work our way up to the neckline of the garment. So the first thing we're marking off is our bottom hem and the hem height. So the side seam and the hem height. Notice that this is going to be, it's a 1 inch hem, so it'll be a 1/2 inch notch. This is a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so it'll be a 1/4 inch notch. Then we want to mark where our armhole is, where the sewing starts. Don't forget to transfer the notches from what we had before. You always need the armhole notch to tell if it's the front or the back. You don't want the notch to live on the cut line. It needs to transfer to the seam allowance. Then we have our shoulder seam. We have our dart legs. And we have our neckline. Now we've added all of our notches. Last thing that we need to do is label the pieces. You can follow the lettering underneath there to help guide you to make it nice and straight. If that is an issue for you, you can use your graph ruler to draw lines here very faintly as guidelines for yourself. The point is, even though we're not computers, we want to draw as straight and organized as possible. So first thing you need is, whose design is it? That means your name. So I'm going to add my name here. This is Professor Trippeer. Second thing we need is, what piece is this? So this is the front bodice with shoulder dart. Then we need to know, how many are there? This is on the fold, so we're going to cut 1 on fold. Then we need a year and season. In this case, it's fall 2020. And then we need to know what size. This is an 8, sample size 8. And that is how you will be identifying all of your homework assignments. we've just done the full scale. I want to show you, because you'll be working all your homework assignments on the half scale, what that looks like in the same process. So we're following all the same rules. The measurements are cut in half. So anything that was a quarter here becomes an eighth. Anything that was a half here becomes a quarter. Anything that was an inch here becomes a half. But we're going to follow the same process here, just so that you can understand the difference between using the full size and using the half scale, which is what all your homework assignments will be for your notebook. Ultimately, your finished notebook, you'll be turning in, you'll be attaching all of your homework assignments and labeling each exercise in the same way we have them labeled in class. So the first step is always establish your grain line. This is where we're using our front, so we're going to mark that our center front. Second step, we hook up our sloper to the grain line. Third step, mark where we want the new dart to go. In this case, this is the shoulder dart. This is exercise 101, where we're pivoting the waist dart into the shoulder. So I want to draft from new to old, shoulder to neck, to that first dart leg. I put my pencil in the bust point. I pivot the dart closed. Then I finish drawing from new to old. Where my shoulder dart was marked, I'm doing shoulder, armhole notch, side seam, and waist. And I'm making sure I've marked very clearly my apex. Same thing as before. Now I need to find my dart center. I need to find that halfway point so that I can find my new dart leg. That's my new dart leg. Next step is we're going to back off 5/8 from our true apex. But in our half scale, we need to use half of that. So 5/8 of an inch is really a quarter plus a 16th. So we're backing off a quarter plus a 16th for our new bust point. This is where we draw in our dart legs to the new backed off bust point. Now we can go ahead and true all of our lines. So using our curve tools, I'm going to go in and true my hem. I want to make sure all my corners are squared. Then we need to true the dart. So just like on the demonstration of the large scale, the first thing I need to do is put a pinch where the new bust point is. Then I want to take all my dart excess towards the bottom hem. I'm going to fold on that first dart leg. Then I pinch back on my dart. Close the dart so that I can true the shoulder. I need to make sure that this is corrected, so I'm truing my shoulder seam. And I'm using my tracing wheel to capture this dart excess there properly. I can see here where that dart excess is. Now I can go in and add my seam allowance. So what was a 1/4 inch on the neckline in the full scale is only 1/8 of an inch in the half scale. What was an inch for the hem on the full scale is only a ½ inch for the half scale, which was a ½ inch for side seam, armhole, shoulder, and darts, and the full is only a quarter in the half scale. Making sure I'm marking my grain. So again, this is on the fold. And making sure my labeling is properly. So front broadest with shoulder dart, you can abbreviate on here. This is how many are we cutting. So your name, what it is, how many are cutting, cut 1 on fold, the year and season, and the size. So all of your homework assignments will be done using the smaller scale. Remember, when you draw your new dart, we need to draw the new dart punch mark. What was a ½ inch in the full scale becomes a ¼ inch in the half scale. This becomes our new punch mark. So when we back off of our true apex, it was 5/8 up in here. This is a quarter plus a 16th. When we back off for the punch mark a ½ inch in the full, this becomes a quarter. And then you go in and add all your seam allowance. 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch. So everything that we're doing in the full scale, we are reducing by half for the half scale. The graph ruler is your best friend. We'll also be giving you a printed half-scale ruler to utilize. But I think it's, if you get used to using your graph ruler, you won't need a cheat sheet. You'll be able to work out the math for yourself. And you'll complete the project in the same way you did the full scale.